The boardroom was silent. Not the comfortable silence of agreement, but the suffocating stillness of fear. 24 executives sat frozen around the massive mahogany table, their eyes fixed on the woman at the head, their breaths shallow, their hands clammy. None of them dared to move. None of them dared to speak. They had learned, through painful experience, that the wrong word at the wrong moment could end a career in seconds. At 34, Sloan Whitmore commanded more power than most people would see in a lifetime. She was the youngest CEO in Whitmore Industries' 70-year history, a position she had clawed her way to with a ruthlessness that had become legendary. Her father, the company's founder, had always said she had ice in her veins and fire in her belly. He had meant it as a compliment. She had taken it as a mantra. She was tall, impossibly elegant, with sharp cheekbones and darker hair that she wore in a severe knot at the nape of her neck. Her suits were custom-made, her heels were lethal, and her gaze could strip the confidence from the most seasoned executive. She was beautiful in the way a glacier was beautiful, magnificent, untouchable, and capable of destroying anything that got too close. The quarterly reports lay scattered across the table, their numbers red and damning. 3 consecutive quarters of decline. Unacceptable. Inexcusable. Her eyes swept across the room, cataloguing the faces of her department heads, each one shrinking under her scrutiny. "I want to know," she said, her voice low and dangerously calm, "how a company with the resources we have managed to lose 7% of our market share in 6 months. I want to know whose incompetence is responsible for this disaster. And I want to know why I shouldn't fire every single person in this room and start over." The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Then, from the far end of the table, a voice spoke. Quiet, steady, and entirely without fear. "Because firing everyone would be a waste of talent, and you know it." Every head in the room swiveled toward the speaker. Sloane's eyes narrowed, her focus sharpening like a blade. The man who had spoken was young, perhaps 32, with sandy brown hair that was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and there was a smear of what looked like marker ink on his wrist. He was not cowering. He was not trembling. He was leaning back in his chair with an infuriating calm, his hazel eyes meeting hers without a flicker of fear. Sloane felt something shift in her chest. Annoyance. Curiosity. A strange, unsettling warmth that she immediately crushed. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "And who exactly are you?" "Declan Hayes," he said, rising from his chair. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made him seem larger than he was. "I'm the new head of creative strategy. I started last week." "Sit down, Mr. Hayes," she snapped. "I didn't ask for your opinion." "You asked why you shouldn't fire everyone," he said, remaining standing. "I'm giving you an answer. The problem isn't talent. The problem is direction. We're selling the same products the same way we've been selling them for the past decade, while our competitors are innovating. We're not adapting. We're not evolving. We're stuck. And you think you can fix that?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "I think I can try," he said simply. "But I can't do it if I'm fired." The room held its breath. No one challenged Sloane Whitmore. No one. The last man who had tried had been escorted out by security before his coffee had gone cold. But Declan Hayes stood there, his expression earnest, his eyes unwavering, and for the first time in years, Sloane was at a loss for words. "You have exactly 3 minutes," she finally said, her voice clipped. "Convince me." He did. In 3 minutes, Declan Hayes laid out a strategy that was bold, innovative, and exactly what the company needed. He spoke of digital transformation, of community engagement, of building a brand that people connected with emotionally rather than just transactionally. He spoke of the future, of the changing landscape of consumer behavior, of the need to evolve or die. And when he was finished, even Sloane had to admit, reluctantly, begrudgingly, silently, that he was right. "That's a lot of talk, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "But talk is cheap. I need results." "Then give me 3 months," he said. "If I don't deliver, I'll walk out myself. No severance, no fuss." 6 weeks, she countered. "And if you fail, you don't just walk out. You walk out with a public resignation. I want everyone to know that your grand ideas were nothing but empty words." He smiled. It was a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes and softened his entire face. "Deal." And that was how Declan Hayes became the first man in Whitmore Industries to survive a meeting with Sloane Whitmore with his job intact. It was also the beginning of something far more complicated, something neither of them had seen coming. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of deadlines, late nights, and arguments. Declan's approach was completely different from what Sloane was used to. He didn't just sit in meetings and give orders. He walked the floors, talked to the junior staff, even brought in coffee for the interns. He listened. He asked questions. He treated everyone, from the security guards to the senior vice presidents, with the same quiet respect. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the company began to change. People started smiling more. The atmosphere, which had been toxic and tense, began to thaw. Productivity increased. Morale improved. And, to Sloane's profound annoyance, Declan's strategy started working. Sales were up. Engagement was up. Even the board, which had been grumbling about Sloane's leadership, was starting to notice. But it wasn't the business results that bothered her. It was something else. Something she couldn't quite name. It was the way he looked at her. Not with fear, not with deference, but with a kind of quiet understanding that made her feel exposed. He saw through her armor, through her icy exterior, and he wasn't afraid. He wasn't intimidated. He just saw her. It terrified her. "You're doing it again," he said one evening, leaning against the doorframe of her office. The rest of the building had emptied hours ago, and the city lights glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like scattered diamonds. "Doing what?" she asked, not looking up from her laptop. "That thing where you pretend you're fine when you're clearly exhausted. You've been here since 6 this morning. It's almost midnight. When was the last time you ate?" "I don't have time to eat," she said, her voice clipped. "I have work to do." "Work can wait," he said, walking into her office. "You can't." "Declan, I don't have time for this." "I brought food," he said, holding up a brown paper bag. "Chinese. Your favorite." "Well, I don't actually know what your favorite is, but I asked your assistant, and she said you always order the same thing when you're stressed. So I got that." Sloane stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You asked my assistant what I eat?" "I asked your assistant how I could get you to stop working for 5 minutes, he corrected. She suggested food. And threats. I decided to try the food first." For a moment, she almost smiled. Almost. She caught herself just in time, but the softening of her features was unmistakable. "You're ridiculous," she said, closing her laptop. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me," he said, grinning as he set the bag on her desk. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the cold, uncomfortable silence she was used to. It was warm, companionable, almost nice. Declan told her about his day, about the new campaign he was working on, about the interns who had come up with an idea so brilliant he had almost cried with pride. He spoke with such passion, such genuine enthusiasm, that Sloane found herself listening, really listening, in a way she rarely did. "Why did you choose this job?" she asked, her voice curious. "You could have gone anywhere. You're talented, Declan. Why Whitmore? He was quiet for a moment, his fork hovering over the takeout container. Because I believe in what this company can be, he said finally. And because I believe in you. She blinked. What? I know you're not going to like hearing this, he said, setting down his fork, but I read your father's biography. I read about the work he did, the legacy he built. And I read about you. The pressure you've been under since you took over. The expectations. The way everyone expects you to be perfect, all the time, without ever making a mistake. He shook his head. That's not sustainable, Sloane. You're going to burn out if you keep this up. I don't burn out, she said, her voice cold. I'm not like everyone else. No, he agreed. You're not. You're smarter, more driven, more capable than most people I've ever met. But you're still human. You still need to eat. You still need to sleep. And you still need someone to remind you that it's okay to take a break. I don't need someone. Everyone needs someone, he interrupted gently. Even you. They stared at each other, the tension between them crackling like static electricity. Then Declan pushed back his chair and stood up. I should go, he said. It's late. You should go home too. I will, she said, though they both knew it was a lie. He paused at the door, turning back to look at her. Sloane? What? You're not as alone as you think you are. And then he was gone, leaving her alone in her office with a half-eaten container of Chinese food and a feeling she couldn't quite identify. For the next several weeks, Sloane found herself seeking Declan out. She told herself it was because she needed to monitor his progress, to make sure he was delivering on his promises. But the truth was far more complicated. She liked being around him. She liked his warmth, his humor, his complete lack of fear. He was the only person in the world who made her feel like she could breathe. And then everything fell apart. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Sloane had called an emergency meeting to discuss the launch of their new product line. Everything had been going smoothly, the numbers were strong, the feedback was positive. But then Declan walked in, and he was late. 5 minutes late. Unacceptable. You're late, Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice cold as ice. I know, he said, his face flushed. I'm sorry. There was an emergency. An emergency, she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What could possibly be so important that you would keep an entire boardroom waiting? He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the door burst open and a small figure darted inside. Daddy! You forgot my lunch. Everyone in the room froze. Sloane's eyes went wide. Standing in the middle of the boardroom, her tiny hands on her hips, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with wild red curls and a face full of freckles. Her eyes, a brilliant shade of green, were fierce and demanding. Poppy, Declan said, his voice strained. What are you doing here? You forgot my lunch, Poppy repeated, holding up a small pink lunchbox. And I was hungry. So I called Uncle Ben, and he brought me here. Who's Uncle Ben? Sloane asked, her voice dangerously quiet. My neighbor, Declan said quickly. He watches her sometimes when I have meetings. How many times, Daddy? Poppy interrupted, looking up at him with those bright green eyes. You forgot my lunch 3 times this week. 3 times. I know, baby, he said, crouching down to her level. I'm sorry. I've been really busy. Busy is not an excuse, Poppy said, repeating the words with the authority of a miniature CEO. You said that. Remember? You said busy is not an excuse when you forgot my bedtime story. So you can't use it either. Sloane stared at the scene unfolding before her. The other executives were trying to stifle their laughter. Declan was a bright shade of red. And Poppy was standing there, her little arms crossed, looking like the most stubborn child on the planet. And then Sloane saw something that made her heart stop. Poppy's lunchbox was held together with tape. Her shoes were scuffed, her dress was slightly too small, and there was a faint shadow under her eyes. This wasn't a child who was pampered and spoiled. This was a child who was struggling. A child whose father was clearly doing his best but falling short. "Declan," Sloane said, her voice soft. "Who is this?" "My daughter," he said, standing up. "Poppy. Poppy Hayes." "Your daughter," she repeated. "You have a daughter. And you never told me." "I didn't think it was relevant," he said, his jaw tight. "Not relevant," she repeated, her voice rising. "You have a child, and you didn't think it was relevant? You show up late to meetings, you leave early, you cancel appointments, and now I understand why. You're a single father who can't keep his personal life from interfering with his professional responsibilities." "Sloane, that's not fair." "Fair?" she laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "I don't care about fair, Mr. Hayes. I care about results. And your results are slipping. I don't have time to babysit your personal problems. Sloane, please." "You're fired," she shouted, the words echoing through the room. "Pack your things. I want you out of this building within the hour. I'll have security escort you out if necessary." The room went deathly silent. Declan stared at her, his face pale, his eyes filled with shock and something else, something that looked a lot like disappointment. Poppy, sensing the tension, started to cry. "Daddy, what's happening? Why is the lady so angry? Is she going to hurt you?" "No, baby," Declan said, his voice rough. "Everything's fine. We're just going home, okay? We're going home." He scooped Poppy into his arms, gathering her lunchbox and his briefcase. As he walked toward the door, he paused, looking back at Sloane one last time. "You know," he said quietly, "I really thought you were different. I thought there was more to you than this. I thought you could see past your own walls long enough to see that I was trying. But I was wrong. You're exactly what everyone says you are, Sloane. You're ice. And ice doesn't care about anyone but itself." He walked out, and the door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed louder than any shout. Sloane stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just fired the best employee she had ever had. She had just humiliated him in front of the entire board. She had just made a little girl cry. And for the first time in her life, she felt something that terrified her more than failure. She felt guilt. She felt shame. She felt the cold, hard truth of what she had done. Hours later, Sloane sat alone in her office, staring at the empty city skyline. She had cancelled her remaining meetings, ignored her assistant's concerned messages, and sent everyone home. She couldn't face them. She couldn't face anyone. She kept seeing Poppy's face. The tears. The confusion. The way the little girl had looked at her, terrified and bewildered. And Declan's words echoed in her head like a cruel refrain. "You're ice. And ice doesn't care about anyone but itself." She had spent her whole life building walls to protect herself. She had convinced herself that being alone was better than being vulnerable. That power was better than love. That success was better than happiness. But now, sitting in the silence of her office, surrounded by the trappings of a life she had built at the expense of everything else, she realized the truth. She wasn't successful. She was empty. She wasn't powerful. She was lonely. She wasn't strong. She was afraid. She thought about Declan, the way he had brought her Chinese food, the way he had challenged her, the way he had looked at her without fear. She thought about Poppy, the fierce little girl with the taped-together lunchbox and the demanding green eyes. She thought about everything she had given up, every connection she had severed, every relationship she had destroyed because she was too scared to let anyone in, and she made a decision. She grabbed her coat and her keys and ran. Declan's apartment was in a modest building on the other side of the city. It was small, cramped, and cluttered with toys, and exactly where Sloane was meant to be. She stood outside his door, her hand shaking as she raised it to knock. She had never begged for anything in her life. She had never apologized. She had never admitted she was wrong. But tonight, she was going to do all three. The door opened, and Declan stood there, his face weary, his eyes red-rimmed. He was wearing a faded t-shirt and sweatpants, and there was a smear of something purple on his cheek, paint, maybe, or marker. He looked like he had been crying. "Sloane," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," he said. "You fired me. It's done." "Please," she said again. "I need to try. I need to try to make this right." He looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something. Whatever he saw, it was enough. He stepped aside and let her in. The apartment was a disaster. Toys were scattered everywhere, drawings were taped to the walls, and there were dirty dishes in the sink. But it was warm, and it was lived in, and it was filled with the unmistakable presence of a family that loved each other. Poppy was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked under her, watching a cartoon on a small, outdated television. When she saw Sloane, her eyes widened. "The angry lady," she said, her voice wary. "Why is she here?" "Poppy, sweetheart," Declan said gently. "Can you go to your room for a little while? I need to talk to our guest. Will you be okay?" Poppy asked, her little brow furrowed with concern. "I'll be fine, baby," he said, kissing her forehead. "I promise." Poppy hesitated, then nodded. She slid off the couch and padded to her room, pausing at the door to look back at Sloane with those fierce green eyes. "Don't make my daddy sad again," she said. "He's already sad enough." And then she disappeared, leaving Sloane alone with the weight of her guilt. "You raised an amazing little girl," she said softly. "I didn't have a choice," he said, his voice tired. "Her mother left when she was 2. It's just been us since then." "And you've been doing it alone." "Not entirely," he said. "I have a support system. My neighbor Ben helps when I have to work late. The girls at the daycare have been amazing. But yeah, mostly it's just us." Sloane felt her heart crack. "Declan, I'm so sorry. What I did today, it was unforgivable. I didn't know about Poppy. I didn't know you were struggling. And even if I had known, that doesn't excuse the way I treated you. I was cruel, and I was wrong, and I am so sorry." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Why did you do it? Why did you fire me?" "Because I was scared," she admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I was scared of what you made me feel. You're the first person in years who's seen me, really seen me, not just the CEO, not just the Ice Queen, but the person underneath. And it terrified me. I pushed you away because I didn't know how to let you in. I built these walls because I thought they would protect me, but all they did was keep me alone." "Your walls," he said, his voice gentle. "They're not the only ones. I have them too." "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes distant. "When Poppy's mother left, I swore I would never let anyone that close again. I threw myself into my work, into raising Poppy, and I convinced myself that I didn't need anything else. But then you walked into that boardroom, and you were so tough and so cold, and I saw myself in you. I saw the fear. The loneliness. The desperate need to be in control because you had lost control of everything else. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to let people in. I don't know how to trust, or love, or be vulnerable. My father, he was never there. My mother was always disappointed. I learned that the only person I could count on was myself. And then I met you, and you made me want things I never thought I could have. What kind of things? Love, she said, her voice breaking. Family. A home that actually feels like a home. And I was so terrified of wanting those things, because wanting them meant risking losing them. And I can't lose anyone else, Declan. I can't. She broke down then, the tears she had been holding back for years finally spilling over. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She had never cried in front of anyone. She had never shown this kind of weakness. But with Declan, it felt safe. With Declan, she didn't have to pretend. He moved toward her, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her close. She collapsed against his chest, her tears soaking his shirt, and he held her, rubbing her back in slow, soothing circles. It's okay, he murmured. It's going to be okay. How can you say that, she sobbed. I ruined everything. I hurt you. I hurt Poppy. I don't deserve your kindness. You don't get to decide what you deserve, he said firmly. You're not the only one who's made mistakes, Sloane. I kept Poppy a secret from you because I was scared, too. I was scared that if you knew about her, you'd think I was unprofessional. That you'd see me as a liability instead of an asset. I was trying so hard to prove myself that I forgot to be honest. You were protecting her, Sloane said, pulling back to look at him. You were protecting the person you love most. That's not a mistake. That's being a parent. It's also being afraid, he said. We're both so scared, Sloane. And that fear is what keeps us from being happy. It's what keeps us from letting people in. But if we don't let people in, we're always going to be alone. She looked at him, her eyes swollen and red. What do we do now? I don't know, he admitted. But I think we start by being honest. No more walls. No more secrets. Just, honesty. Honesty, she repeated. I can do that. I know, he said, smiling. I know you can. The next morning, Sloane arrived at Declan's apartment with a plan. She had spent the night thinking, planning, strategizing. She had called her lawyers, her assistants, her entire team. And by the time the sun rose, she had put together something she hoped would make things right. Declan, she said, standing on his doorstep. I have a proposal. I'm listening, he said cautiously. First, I want to reinstate your job. Not just reinstate it, but promote you. I want you to be head of the entire creative division. You'll have full autonomy, full control, and a salary that reflects your worth. All right, he said slowly. And what's the catch? There's no catch, she said. But I also want to do something else. I want to establish a new program at Whitmore. A family-first initiative. Flexible hours, on-site childcare, parental leave for both mothers and fathers. I want this company to be a place where parents like you don't have to choose between their jobs and their children. Declan stared at her, his mouth slightly open. You're serious? I've never been more serious about anything in my life, she said. I've spent years building a company, but I've realized that a company is nothing without the people who work for it. And those people have lives, families, children. If I want Whitmore to be the best company in the world, I need to make it the best company for everyone. Including you. Including Poppy. Poppy, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're doing this for Poppy? I'm doing this for all of us, she said. I'm doing this because I realize that the only thing that matters is the people we love. And I love you, Declan. And I love Poppy. I know it's crazy. I know I barely know you. But I've never felt this way about anyone before, and I don't want to lose it. He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, his hands cupping her face, his eyes blazing with emotion. You love me? I love you, she said, her voice trembling. I love you so much it terrifies me. You're not the only one who's terrified, he said, his voice rough. But I've been alone for so long, Sloane. And then you came along, and you were so fierce and so strong, and I couldn't stop thinking about you. You're the first person since Poppy's mother left who made me feel like I could have something more. You made me feel like I could hope again. Then let's hope together, she said. Let's build something together. You, me, and Poppy. He kissed her then, a deep, passionate kiss that stole her breath and made her heart soar. It was everything she had never allowed herself to want, and it was better than she ever could have imagined. When they finally pulled apart, Declan was grinning like a fool. Does this mean I have to call you boss? Only in the office, she said, smiling. Outside of the office, I'm just Sloane. You're Sloane. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Sloane's life. She spent every spare moment with Declan and Poppy, learning the rhythms of their life, becoming a part of their family. She learned that Poppy was allergic to strawberries, that she had a favorite stuffed bunny named Mr. Fluff, and that she was absolutely terrified of thunderstorms. She learned that Declan was a terrible cook but an amazing storyteller, and that he snored, loudly, when he was exhausted. She learned that their love wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was all that mattered. The wedding was small, just a handful of friends and family in Declan's backyard. Poppy was the flower girl, scattering petals with wild abandon, and she insisted on standing beside Sloane the entire time. I'm not giving her away, Poppy announced to the assembled guests. I'm keeping her. She's my mama now. Sloane cried at that. She cried like she had never cried before, and Declan held her hand, his own eyes glistening. She's right, he whispered. You're her mama. And I'm so glad I get to spend the rest of my life with you. 5 years later, Sloane Whitmore Hayes sat in her office at the newly renamed Whitmore Hayes Foundation. She had stepped down as CEO 2 years ago, handing the reins to a team she trusted implicitly. Now she spent her days running the foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting working parents and their children. It was the most fulfilling work she had ever done. Her phone buzzed. A text from Declan. The girls are asking when you're coming home. They want to build a fort. I told them I was hopeless at forts, so they need you. She smiled, her heart full. She looked at the framed picture on her desk, the 4 of them, arms around each other, laughing at the camera. Poppy was now 10, a brilliant young artist whose work had been featured in local galleries. And 2 years ago, they had welcomed a new addition to the family. A little girl named Daisy, with red curls and a smile that could light up the world. She typed back, on my way. Tell them Mama's coming. And Declan, I love you. I love you too, he replied. Always. She put on her coat and headed out the door, her heels clicking a confident rhythm on the marble floor. She was no longer the ice queen of Whitmore Industries. She was Sloane Whitmore Hayes, wife, mother, and the happiest woman in the world. She had finally found the family she always dreamed of. And she was never letting go. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and Sloane knew, deep in her heart, that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Not in a cold, empty penthouse, but in a warm, chaotic house filled with love and laughter. She had learned, finally, that true success isn't measured in money or power. It's measured in the hearts you touch and the lives you change. And she had changed the lives of 3 people. Her husband and her daughters, just as they had changed hers. She was Sloane Whitmore Hayes, and she was finally, completely, undeniably whole.